Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Wise Cat, and I think it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about Coco. She's actually lost some weight. No, I'm talking about that meta monster, Day Live. The set dropped in English about 2 months ago, and ever since then, we've been hearing a lot about it and seeing it show up in a lot of the more high-profile tournaments. And it's no wonder. Day Live has some of the strongest and best cards ever printed in either language. I mean, look at this card. This is the level 3 Kurumi that burns, heals, decompresses, stock swaps, and hey, maybe it'll wash your car if you ask it. The text on this card is just stupid. Or this event. Imagine a 1-0 event that outclasses Calling Card or 3D Maneuver Gear. Yeah, cool, right? But if you think that's a bit much, how about a Goblin Slayer Cowgirl box promo that's in every trial deck, or any other one of these stupid cards? Well, see, that's the thing about Day Live. There are just a ton of cards that are more versatile, more competitively costed, and just in general, stronger than other cards in their class. If you're looking for good cards.deck, you should look no further. As long as you're sticking to the recognized shell, how you'll fill in the blanks is pretty much never going to be wrong. But that's why I'm going to do something a little different in this video. Usually when I do a deck tech, I go level by level and show you my particular take on an established deck card for card, and what we end up with is a comprehensive list. But here's the thing, Day Live has a lot of different ways to build around the shell of strong cards in the set, and most of them only involve chitting a few cards at level 1 and 0. So instead, what I'll do, both to showcase that these are all strong options, and also to show you all the stuff you might see when you face the meta builds for DAL, is this. First, we'll go over the basic shell and the strategy, then we'll talk about the variations you can make on that shell, and how they play differently from one another. Also, for those of you not sure what I'm saying here, as I normally don't go too hard into actual jargon for card games, a shell of a deck is a set of cards that establish the strategy and direction of a deck. These are the cards that drive the deck and don't change much no matter how you decide to build. Usually in Wish4s, these are your main combos, strongest zeros, and your finishers. So that said, let's get into the shell of meta Day Live. Of course, it all starts here. Terrible Spirit Kurumi. She's got almost as text as James the Mind Sculptor, and she's pretty much as game-defining as when that bastard dropped in World Wake. First off, she's a 3/2, 2 soul, and base 9500. If you have 2 or more other characters, she gets plus 1k, so all the time. And when you play her from your hand, she heals. But we're here for the Climax combo. And on that note, let it be known that this is one of the very few level 3 finishers that combos with a Standby Climax. Yeah, a Standby Climax. Now normally if you're packing Standby, you're sacrificing access to a large variety of tech and combos to modify your deck to take advantage of it. There are very few true advantage or finishing combos that have Standby. This is because of how powerful the Standby trigger already is. So having any card that combos with Standby and is good to play regardless of what the trigger is insanely good. On top of that, what Kurumi's combo does is also insanely good on its own. But what does she even do? Well, everything. Her Climax combo activates when she attacks, and you can choose to use one of 3 different abilities. So important to note is that there's virtually no way your opponent can interact with this combo, either by backups or what's on their stage, which already makes any finishing combo a lot better. And what's more, the first 2 options you have are free. First, you can choose up to 3 cards in your opponent's waiting room and have your opponent shuffle them back into their deck. So obviously, this is a pretty good way to decompress your opponent, but also, if they have any number of cards in a deck with no climaxes in it, even 1 card, they're basically just dead. Second, you can have your opponent put all of their stock into their waiting room and have your opponent put the same number of cards from the top of their deck into their stock. Again, considering how hard players try to keep climaxes out of their stock and in their deck, this is a very powerful decompression tool. Many decks play cards purely because they have this kind of effect, and pay a good deal of stock for it because it's so effective at securing damage. So it goes without saying that these 2 first abilities are super good. Now the third ability isn't free, but it's a lot more straightforward. Pitch 2 cards, deal 3 damage. 3 is a very uncomfortable number, since it's on the edge of being a huge problem if it sticks and a bit less likely to cancel, even in a compressed deck. And pitching 2 cards is a very low price for predictable on-attack damage. It doesn't even cost stock. So Terrible Spirit Kurumi has a lot of good things about her. She's one of the most comprehensive, competitively costed, and versatile to any game state finishers we know. And may I remind you, she combos with a Standby trigger. So it's no wonder that she pretty much defines what you'd expect to see in a meta Day Live build. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of other Day Live decks out there that don't use Kurumi at all. The good cards are not limited to the staples we'll talk about here, but seriously, is it any wonder that she's so central to so many builds? So now that we know the linchpin, how does the rest of the deck take shape? Well, obviously, she's a Standby combo, so you're going to see a lot of things that can capitalize from that unique Standby trigger. Beefy, stocky, inefficient targets that pack big power, big soul, and unfair abilities, Standby often makes for a very stage presence centered deck, and for good reasons, but it also needs a lot of techie zeros to support it throughout the game to keep your consistency and compression, since by running Standby, you're often sacrificing these more techie cards in other parts of your deck, and Standby snowballs out of control the sooner you can make it happen. But one very unique thing about Kurumi is that her combo is at level 3, which means that the level 1 is suddenly open to more conventional combos, something very rare for Standby focused decks. So it's no surprise that this is where the decks kind of diverge in strategy. That said, what we'll do is talk about the common zeros, 1s, 2s, and 3s you'll see in this shell, and then talk about how the different level 1 choices influence the rest of the deck. So let's first start with level 0. First up on the block, Conflict with Humans Toka. Base 1500, and when played from the stage from your hand, she has 2 effects. Reveal the top card of your deck, and if you see a character, you add it to your hand and then pitch a card. And then if you want, you can also pitch a character in order to draw a card. Right away, this is very powerful because it has 2 instances of filtering and gives you the ability to draw into a climax if you want, seen or unseen. This is the same printed text as the Cowgirl promo from Goblin Slayer, and that card is stupid expensive and hard to find. If this card wasn't in the trial deck, I'm sure it would demand an outrageous price. And worth noting is that this is especially good in standby decks, since you want to slam as many standbys as possible, and it lets you pitch good targets to the waiting room. So yeah, instant inclusion, usually a 4 of, sometimes a 3 of in most builds. Next, let's talk about Kotori Itsuga. Again, 1500 and 2 abilities. First, when she attacks, you can give any character plus 1k. Not amazingly notable, but her second ability is what's important. When she goes to the waiting room from the stage, you can pitch a card. If you do, you can look at the top 4 cards of your deck, choose any level 1 or higher card among them and put it into your hand, and then put the rest into the waiting room. Again, the filtering is good in any deck, but this lets us get a lot of cards into the waiting room early in the game for standby, and again, lets us pitch standby targets. It also doesn't specify character, which can be important depending on the build you rock. And finally, standby decks are typically top heavy, so the restriction isn't too limiting. Again, this can be a 3 or 4 of, usually in high numbers. Finally in red, we have Swimsuit Kotori. On play, you can look at the top 2 and rearrange them if you want, which of course gives us clairvoyance with a lot of DAL's top check abilities, and that's great. And second, on play, you can pay 1 and pitch 1 to salvage a character and give one of your other characters plus 1k for the turn. Again, very good synergy with standby because it's waiting room interaction and hand filtering, which is also a very strong suite of abilities on a drop searcher. We generally see this card as a 2 or 3 of. Moving to yellow, let's tackle Shido Itsuka, 1500 again, and when he comes into play, you can choose a character on your opponent's stage, send them to memory, and then put them back. This is great tech because not only does it get rid of things like markers, but it strips a card of any abilities that aren't permanent, like if it's getting plus 1k till the end of your next turn. If you send it to memory and put it back, that stuff goes away, and that's a huge problem for a lot of defensive climax combos. Looking at you, Priestess. However, this isn't the only reason he's so common. You can pay 1 and send him to the waiting room to top check 4 and add a character, which we already know is great for a lot of reasons. Now on top of this, he also clocks for yellow, which depending on your build can be important since yellow isn't generally where we find our standby targets. You'll usually see him anywhere as a 2 to 4 of, but he's also one of the only yellow zeros in a lot of lists. There is a level 0 Kurumi Brainstormer that's a tap self-search, but not as many people run her, and she only typically appears in one choice of deck in this video. The other and more common Brainstormer is blue, and it's for the Sky and Sword Toka. She's a tap 2 searching Brainstormer, which is very weird since you usually don't see those given the prevalence of tap self Brainstormers now. However, there are 2 elements that make her the prevailing choice. First, your back row has some busted cards that don't need to rest, so she generally has a partner to work with. And second, her second ability is awesome for us. When you play a climax, you can bounce it to your hand and give a character plus 1k until the end of your opponent's next turn. As someone who's played a lot of standby, I can tell you how hard it is to manage your backstage sometimes. Brainstormers are integral to any deck, and standby sometimes conflicts with their permanent stage position. The fact that this Brainstormer bounces back to hand is super good for standby, as it alleviates that tension, so naturally it's the premier choice for most decks using this shell. Now just to note, there's also a Kurumi box topper that a lot of people elect to play that buffs a character by 1500 on attack and lets you shuffle 2 characters back into your deck, decide without penalty for the turn. I'm not good enough to understand why this is so good, and I just think people play it because it's Kurumi in a bra. Anyway, that's about what you can expect from the Zero Shell. There are plenty of prevalent and good tech choices, but these are your big hitters, so let's move on to the level 1. Now, of course, this is where we see a lot of more divergence in level 1 combos, so what I'll talk about here is the supporting level 1 cards you'll see in a lot of different builds. First on the agenda, we'll talk about School Uniform Toka. She's actually a level 1 back row, and on the start of your opponent's draw phase, you can give a character plus 1500 for the turn. Also, when you reverse a character on your opponent's turn, you can top check and put what you see on the top or bottom of your deck. This card is good for so many reasons. First, the power boost is insane, and she can make a lot of characters totally out of reach. And second, the ability to capitalize on that power, and of course since standby is a power-driven deck, to scry on your opponent's turn for a better chance of canceling is absolutely bonkers. This card is stupid good and it's integral to most builds. We generally see it as a 3 or 4 of, and notably it may be the best 1-0 standby target in the game. But speaking of standby targets, the main one we'll see in this shell at level 1 is Great Interest Kurumi, 1/1, 6000, and she gets plus 1500 in hand encore if you have 2 or more other characters. This is the most classic and common standby target with clones across many different sets, so there's no need to talk about why we see her here. Finally, at level 1, something you'll see often when facing DAL in any form is this event, a yellow 1-0 event called My Little Shido. And like Kurumi's combo, it comes in 3 modes, though to use any of them you have to rest a character. In mode 1, you can top check 4 and add a character, so an Akatsuki event. In mode 3, if you have 6 or fewer cards in hand, you can choose a level 3 in your waiting room and return it to your hand. But in mode 2, this is where it gets a little weird. First, you choose one of your opponent's level 1 or higher characters, and then they choose a character in their waiting room, with the caveat that the character your opponent chooses has to be -1 level or lower than the character you chose. Then, these characters are exchanged. Now, to clear up 2 things you might be wondering about this card's effect immediately, is first, as far as I can tell, the card that's sent to the waiting room can still be encored, but of course it loses any non-permanent abilities that it was carrying, and second, you cannot use this ability when your opponent has an empty waiting room, as there's no legal target for the card's activation. But aside from that, the effect here is just nuts. There are very few ways to directly deal with cards on your opponent's stage on your turn, outside just killing them with power. Weiss Wars is not a game that really has removal, quote unquote. This event solves so many problems on the other side of the stage, it's disgusting. And on your side too. Resting a character kind of sucks, but who cares? The flexibility and power of this card justify the cost without question. Now, surprising as it may sound, not every deck packs these because A, the list is crowded as it is, and B, the color management in DAL can be a little difficult at level 1. However, in the decks that do, it's usually a 3 of, sometimes a 4 of. Anyway, let's cap out the level 1 staples with Tokei Yotogami. She's a 1-0 2k backup, which is always good and obviously important in a stage presence driven standby deck. Most decks are packing at least 1 or 2. And that's generally where the level 1 staples that aren't main combos end. Again, obviously there are a million good tech choices, but they vary more from list to list. So it's time to move on to level 2. Well, Day Lai's prime choice is anything but generic. This is Under the Azure Skies Toka. She's 6500 and gets plus 1k for every other character, so she hits the normal 10-5 we expect for this kind of target. It's her second ability that really sets her apart though. When you reverse a battle opponent, you can look at the top 2 cards and put them back in any order, which lets you do 2 things, both order your triggers and rearrange your damage or cancels. Which, by the way, if you didn't know, is insanely good, and she will reverse opponents. There are infinite numbers of things in Day Lai that boost power, but one of the ones that really helps drive this package home is School Uniform Toka at level 1, which both gives 1500 power and lets you scry on your opponent's turn. That is a lot of power and the ability to mess with the top of your deck, even on your opponent's turn when you're taking damage. Frankly, it's dumb, and all the other cards that pack abilities like this are super expensive cost-wise, level 3, or come with massive drawbacks and limitations. It's no wonder at all that this is your primary level 2 standby target, and that said, she's generally a 3 or 4 of depending on how tight you're running the list. Now, some decks will pack Cornered Kurumi instead because of the mirror match. She's 6k and hits 10 with a full stage, but she has Hand Encore instead, which makes her a lot more effective versus other standby decks or the DAL mirror match. However, what pretty much all Day Live decks pack, standby or not, is Swimsuit Kurumi, which is a 2500 2-1 free fresh backup. These aren't incredibly common, but it's a super clutch ability to pack, and most decks, standby or not, will run it as a 1 or 2 of. So now we're going into level 3, and one of the different things about Meta Day Live is that the level 3 tech is actually kind of limited outside Terrible Spirit Kurumi, but of course it's still important, so let's quickly go over it. Pretty much every standby deck runs to Save Spirits Kotori. She's a 3-2 2k front assist that has 3 different auto abilities when you play her from hand. You can choose one, being either top checking 3 and adding 1, salvaging a character, or giving a character plus 1k and plus 1 soul. Again, the flexibility here is great and all, but obviously we're looking to stand by her. That said, she's still a very strong option to pack if you need the tech. Most decks run 2, while some pack 3. Second, we have Dignified Appearance Toka. 4 or more early play, heals, and gets plus 2k till the end of your opponent's next turn as long as you have another character. However, she only sits at base 8500. Now, for an early play healer, this is actually not much to write home about, and in other sets it will be mediocre at best. However, early plays that heal, get over 10k, and have 2 soul are integral to securing a good board state and pushing for damage when you're playing standby, so she's in most decks as anywhere from a 1 to 3 of, though some elect not to play her at all. Finally, we have an interesting secondary finisher, Kurumi Tosaki. Base 9k, and if you have 2 or more characters, she gets plus 1500 and on reverse memory kick. She also happens to be a healer, and when she attacks, you can pay 3, pitch 1, and have your opponent put the bottom 5 cards of their library into their waiting room. then deal X damage where X is the number of climaxes in those 5 cards, and Kurumi gets plus 2k till the end of turn. So punishment for compression, healing, power, and memory kick. What more do you want? You can find this girl as a one-of in most decks, though some elect not to run her. And that wraps it up. These are the cards that comprise the basic shell of most day-to-day life standby decks. But the big part missing is the level 1 combo. Like we said before, there are 3 basic choices you can make to run the combo, and notably a 4th choice that we'll talk about after we address how the different combos influence the rest of the deck. So it comes down to this. Do you like Kotori, Blue Toka, or Red Toka? Each has a very different combo that really changes how the deck plays, and all of them are good. So let's start with the most popular choice in English thus far, Kotori. Reliable little sister Kotori is 4k and gets plus 1500 during your turn if you're playing the game. Her combo is on a choice, and on attack, you reveal the top card of your deck and add it to your hand if it's a character or an event, and then you do it again. So this has the potential to add 1, 2, or no random cards to your hand. Now, she's not actually that powerful, but it's pure on-attack advantage, thus making the deck a little less standby focused and more mid-range. Playing more yellow also gives you easier access to the yellow tech in DAL, like My Little Shido or the level 3 Kurumi. It gives you the best of both worlds in a lot of ways between standby and more mid-range, fair, and non-interactive decks, and there's no question as to why people like it. Another choice is Cruel Reality Toka. When you play the set's second standby climax, you can send her to the waiting room and put a 2/1 called Descent of Calamity Toka on the stage where she was. And Descent of Calamity Toka at 7500 with a 1k boost if you have 2 or more characters lets you stand a character at the start of your attack phase if you have that same climax in your climax zone. So the way this works is that you play standby, use the ability, play your 2/1, get your character, put them in the front row, and then stand them with the 2/1. This build makes the deck a lot more balls to the wall and stage driven, giving you the potential to be swinging with 2 level 2s on your second turn. However, the trade-off to this can be consistency and other sources of advantage. It also makes the list very tight and can squeeze out some tech slots, making it particularly difficult to fit in strong cards like My Little Shido. Without a doubt, it's powerful and will absolutely dominate the stage and walk over some matchups. However, it suffers from some of the same issues as the more classic standby decks. The third choice represents a little of both. Important Promise Toka is 4k and gets plus 2k if you have 2 or more other characters. Her combo is on a book, and at the beginning of your Encore step, if the character facing this card is reversed, or there's nothing there, you get to top check 5 and add 1, and give her plus 500 power till the end of next turn. Now this is still a pretty respectable stage presence, and mostly non-interactive if your opponent hasn't set up the perfect 10k stage of level 2s at level 1. It does make the deck focus a little more on blue, once again tightening the list and potentially making the yellow choices a little less practical, and crowding the level 1 out of standby targets or tech choices. However, it's also very good milling and a respectable body. It has a ton of potential to add consistency and compression to the deck. You'll see this combo play less than the other two for sure. However, I really like it, and I'll be experimenting with it in the future. Now, we did say there was a 4th option, and that of course is to play no combo at all. Many players will like to do this, and it's a perfectly solid option. You can go all in on the standby targets and still have a lot of free space for very decent DAL tech. You can even mix and match finishers and level 2 targets to have a better shot at the mirror match. DAL is a very tight deck list, and dropping the level 1 combo altogether gives you a lot of space to work with and fine-tune your deck options, so it's definitely worth considering. And I think this is where I'm going to wrap it up. This is a pretty long deck tech, and we've covered a lot of options. Now, I do want your feedback here, players. Let me know in the comments whether or not you like this kind of deck tech versus just going down a list, because while it's less specific, I do like that it lets me outline more options. Some sets lend themselves toward one style more than others, so we'll see if I do more like this in the future. Now that said, DAL has plenty of other good decks I could tech card by card. The good stuff does not end with Kurumi and Toka, but I really wanted to talk about this one because it's so prevalent right now, and let's face it, it's interesting and fun to play. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters, regardless of how you feel about meta decks or sweaty tryhards. So keep your hands dry and find out what's fun for you in DAL. Or don't and play other sets. It's a free country, man. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.